improper use of anti-seize.
Hold on.
Oh, you're not recording?
Hold on. Hey, this is the lady auto mechanic Allison Walker with my friend Jay Lehu from Lehu Tech from YouTube fame. And we're just going to talk cars today, mainly about what mechanics do, where they're messing up your car and inadvertently, and just some bad habits and things that we have noticed over the years, the combined pretty good many years experience. So one thing that we had mentioned was the anti-seize.
Yeah, improper use of anti-seize.
Yeah.
So, just for those of you who don't know, anti-seize is, I don't even know what it's composed of really, but it's like a metallic paste, and its purpose is to prevent corrosion. So if you have a bolt and a nut, you can put anti-seize between the two before you tighten it, and the idea is maybe years later when you go to loosen those parts, they won't be seized or rusted. So that's the purpose of anti-seize, but there's a lot of ways that it's misapplied. So the way I've seen it misapplied the most is people will put anti-seize on the threads of spark plugs, which most spark plugs don't really have issues with corrosion causing them to get stuck in the cylinder head. So you're not really preventing anything by applying anti-seize. And I have actually heard of improper grounding. So the spark plug needs to have a really good ground in the engine cylinder head in order to generate a powerful spark. And I've just heard of like a weak ground, and that can lead to like a misfire that's hard to diagnose.
Right.
So
that's what I've heard too. I think the anti-seize on spark plug threads came from when they had the steel heads back in the day, maybe, and they were seizing in that and something like that. But now all heads are aluminum, most blocks are aluminum, so it's something that you don't need to do, and then maybe that's where that came from. But
Yeah.
it's definitely still widespread. I know mechanics that do it, and they're old school. I was actually told to do it, and I was, knew that wasn't a good idea.
like you knew it was wrong from the jump.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had heard about that a long time ago in my career, and so I don't do it, but it was definitely like a holdover. I think that's what it's from. It's from
So
steel heads.
yeah, I guess I'm not aware of when you would ever want to use it on a spark plug, but maybe there is an application.
Yeah.
Like you said, like a flathead, like an old flathead motor that has an iron head.
Yeah, or iron head, yeah.
Maybe
So-
like a tractor, where the spark plugs are exposed to the elements. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that, or motorcycles.
Yeah.
So,
I've seen anti-seize also used a lot on caliper slide pins. I've seen that. There's a
I've
shop I
never
worked at
seen
where
that.
I was still learning a lot, so I didn't really know so much, and I started working at the shop, and there was anti-seize everywhere, like just everywhere. There's little bottles of anti-seize laying around, and I was like, man, what's going on? Why do these guys run through anti-seize? And because you don't normally use a lot of anti-seize when you're working as a mechanic. So, but yeah, I was doing a brake job, and he cleaned off all of the grease, and he was painting on the anti-seize. And
I've
so-
never heard that. That's crazy.
yeah, and obviously, you want a high temperature grease because the calipers, it's involved in the braking system. It gets super hot, and the anti-seize is not designed to provide lubrication under high temp. It's strictly designed to prevent corrosion. So, but you've never taken apart brakes and seen anti-seize on the slide pins?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Thankfully. Now there is grease for caliper pins, and just so everyone knows, you are supposed to use grease on your caliper pins and clean those up when you do a brake job, which is often left
Yeah.
out. That's another thing we can mention that mechanics do wrong, that we've seen a lot,
Yeah.
where they're rushing through brake pad jobs, and or they'll have deals. You've worked at a dealership, I've worked at a dealership.
I haven't worked at a
Or not a
dealership.
dealership, but at a shop.
Yeah.
And then,
A lot of
you
shops will
these
have
brake pad deals.
they'll have promotions, like if you get the pads and the calipers and a flush, you'll save $80 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes it where the tech is rushing through to get a job done, and they don't clean the caliper pins off, make sure they're functioning well, and grease them back up properly. And the caliper pins are where your pad moves in and out on the caliper bracket, so it's very important. And then greasing up other parts of the brake job that need to be done, that gets left out all the time. And eventually what you have is your caliper pins getting seized, and people, they'll think something else is going on. They'll think something's wrong with their caliper when it's just the caliper pin seized. They'll think it's a brake line has gone bad, or the piston itself is locked up when it's actually the caliper pins. I had a guy come in to Advance the other day, and he's like, "Do you have the thing that moves in the caliper pin?"
Yeah.
And I was like
you thought there was a special tool
because his was so stuck, it wasn't moving. And I was like, no. I was like, if that doesn't move freely, you have a problem. You got to replace the whole bracket. Like there's no getting around that.
You should replace the whole bracket.
Right. You should replace the whole bracket.
There was one car I used a slide hammer to remove the slide pin from the bracket, and they didn't want to buy a new bracket, so you just hammered it back in there and kept it moving.
I guess it might have worked for a while.
Yeah.
Or forever. Sometimes something like that will work, but like sometimes it doesn't.
There's a lot of stuff that should get replaced that just never does.
Yeah. I see that a lot too.
But on keeping on theme with mechanics. So when you mentioned anti-seize, it just made me think of like anytime a mechanic is applying any sort of chemical. So there's like silicones. There's like certain chemicals that mechanics use all the time. So like silicone or RTV, it's used for sealing up gaskets or sealing up where two parts come together and you don't want it to leak. So there's a category of silicone that mechanics are supposed to use, and it's oxygen sensor safe. And it'll even say that on the tube. It'll say oxygen sensor safe RTV. Come here, dude.
How's it going?
I gotta make sure my dog doesn't freak out.
Help you find anything today?
Appreciate it.
We just took a little pause there because we got Doogie with us.
Yeah.
Jay's dog.
Dog sitting for myself. Yeah, so RTV, so all modern cars made in like the last 30 or 40 years or so, they have these sensors in the exhaust, and they're used for emissions, but they're also used, especially on newer cars, data from that sensor is needed to make sure the engine runs smoothly. And if you use a silicone on part of the engine that air or fuel goes through, if it's not oxygen sensor safe, it'll actually leak out some particles that will go into the exhaust and contaminate the oxygen sensor. What they do is they actually clog the part of the sensor that does the measuring. And you know, a lot of cars now have they'll have 4 oxygen sensors, and it's a big problem because it's not it won't immediately break your sensors. It's just maybe a year or 2 later your sensors will start malfunctioning, and then it's hard to diagnose the root cause. You know, you can replace the sensors, but your new sensors will fail, just like the old ones did. So that's like a chemical that can have disastrous results if you don't use the right one.
So that's important. So, well, we spoke about a few things that mechanics do.
Yeah, I was trying to nail all of the chemical related ones. Yeah. I guess you could just put on there include like using incorrect fluids in general. Like the Hondas and Acura's require their own power steering fluid. And a well-meaning mechanic who doesn't know that, he might top off your power steering fluid on your Honda with just generic fluid, and he thinks he's doing you a favor, but he's really, setting into motion, a future failure point. So.
Right, and then for some reason Honda rack and pinions leak a lot, so this is kind of a common area. We sell it at my auto parts store that I work at. We sell so much power steering fluid, it's ridiculous, and I always have to wonder if they are driving a Honda, and usually I ask them or catch them ahead of time. A few people come in that do know that, but a lot don't.
Do people ever try to argue with you and say like, no, I'm not, because it costs a little more, right?
It's just a little bit more. It's not,
right.
Definitely not significant. But I guess something about Honda rack and pinions, I'd like to get to the bottom of it. They use their own fluid and then they leak and have problems more. I've seen the seals break on the inside of the rack and pinion and just leaking everywhere
Yeah.
on the rack and pinion. Not like
Do you think they leak more like out of some sort of design issue, or maybe it's
or it could be them putting in wrong fluid. That's
yeah.
you know, so that's like what I thought about. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think
That's a
it's
good
maybe
point.
the fluid they use because it's initially a leak that's causing them to top it off. You know, because
Oh,
it's
right.
you know,
Because
power
they wouldn't be
strips are
topping it off if it
closed.
wasn't a leak.
Right, right. So it shouldn't be, you know, low without there being a leak. And so, you know, yeah, so that's why I've kind of like to do a little more research on that because I'm really curious what causes rack and pinions to go out on Honda so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, wrong fluids, people use the wrong, or, you know, mechanics probably don't do this, which people definitely do, put the wrong coolant in there. There's like at least 5 or 6 different kinds of coolant out there.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of mechanics use universal coolant, which
Right.
I don't know.
Green stuff.
Yeah, instead of making the effort to get the same kind that came in there. Now, technically, you can use universal coolant. As far as I know, it won't gel up or cause a problem with the fluid that's already in there. But I'm the kind of person that I really like to use whatever it came with.
Right.
Specifically the right color. Universal is almost looks like water, so it's not like you can even.
It doesn't seem to last as long.
Yeah.
Like the anti-corrosive properties.
Right.
And some cars have very specific requirements for the coolant, like it's silica-free coolant, right? There's some aspect of the Volvo coolant where they advertise it as having 0 of a certain type of chemical in it.
No, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm definitely familiar with different ones having like specific coolants. Our old Volkswagens use a specific coolant. I know that. Pentafrost is the brand that they use, or I'm not.
That's it. Pentafrost.
Yeah, the Pentafrost is just like really specific to our certain European cars, and definitely Volkswagen. So I guess Volvo too. And a lot of people not taking that very seriously. I've seen that.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that they're just like just using.
You know, it's like if the manufacturer, they advertise it as universal, and it's like for them to do that, they must have some high level of confidence that it is universal.
Right.
You know, like because they could call it something else. They could call it generic, and it wouldn't imply that it's compatible. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you know, I catch a lot of flack on YouTube. Or there's a few videos of mine where I'm changing, you know, like a thermostat or like something cooling related, where I have to top off the cooling system. And I always use universal cooling because that's what's provided to me in the shop. And I get a lot of haters for that, you know, like people arguing, oh,
Yeah.
that's a GM car, you're supposed to use
Dex Cool. Right.
You know, and I'm like, hey, you know, if they're not paying, because the shop didn't even have Dex Cool, and what we would do is we would say anything coolant related, we would try to sell them on flush too.
Yeah.
And if they buy the flush, then of course they're getting all of the Dex Cool out of there, and then it's strictly universal coolant in there.
Oh,
Which is
wow.
probably what you would want, you know.
Yeah, that's one fluid.
Right, but the thing is, like, all the customers who decline to pay for the flush, you know, they would end up with that Frankenstein mixture of whatever was in their system plus, you know, universal coolant.
And who knows, like, if that really gels up or not, or how that does get inside the car, like,
Yeah.
you know, stopping holes and water mains and stuff like that.
What I've always told people is if you're actually changing the coolant when your manufacturer specified interval tells you to, then you won't have issues whether you have a mix of coolant or not. So that's
Which is about every
and I don't-
100,000 miles. Some of them go longer than that.
yeah.
But you only have to change your coolant and refresh it generally every 100,000 miles. Definitely if it's starting to look rusty or dirty. Because like
Right.
most coolant is like red-ish color.
Well, the Dex Cool is it.
Yeah.
A lot of new cars I see with like blue. The coolant would be blue. Yeah.
And my car has orange.
Okay.
The Toyota has the orange color.
The hybrids
or
have
like
their
a
own.
reddish.
The hybrids have their own specs.
For the coolant.
Yeah, for the inverter. I guess that's
It's
probably.
the same coolant that's in
Oh, it
the
is?
engine,
Okay.
but it has a separate section that you flush and do
Right.
within itself.
They're two closed systems.
They're two closed systems
That, I
separate
guess
from each other.
that's probably one thing I probably won't mess around with using universal on a hybrid thing.
Right.
Because if you have some corrosion issue with that, like it's going to be some high dollar stuff.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
Like if your inverter starts corroding internally, like
Yeah.
it's not good. But yeah, there's I can't think of any other chemical type mishaps. I guess at some point you just get to where some mechanics are just sloppy. Like I've seen where some guys will use a jug for coolant, and they'll also use the jug for like washer fluid, and then they wonder why all of their customers have like smeary windshields, you know, like blurry and stuff. I think a lot of what I see also with mechanics inadvertently messing up your car is with just using the wrong tools. Like using a 12-volt socket on a drain plug. And for those of you who don't know, there's 6-point and 12-point sockets. And 6-point sockets are stronger. And they're generally what you would want to use. Dude, you sit? A little technical difficulty here. But yeah, people would always round off or strip the heads on drain parts using just a 12-point socket, which doesn't fully grip the head of the bolt as well.
It's more sides that can round off when that's specifically used for certain 12-point bolts instead of the 6-sided bolts, which most bolts on cars are 6-sided, but there are applications where you need the 12-point.
Yeah.
Which most socket sets sell the 12-point. I don't really grasp
Yeah, like
that
if
concept.
you buy a cheap socket set, it'll come with a bunch of 12 points. And my conspiracy theory is they do that to reduce warranty claims because it's easier to break a 6-point socket because you can put a lot more torque on it before it strips, and you'll put more load on like the ratchet or whatever. But with the 12-point socket, if you put past a certain amount of power, you're just going to strip whatever it is you're trying to force. You're not going to damage the tool. So that's my conspiracy. I think that they include 12 points so that they break less often.
Yeah.
You know, so your tool's not breaking, but what you're working on is breaking. You know, so that's your problem. That's not the tool company's problem.
We could probably do a whole thing on conspiracy theories on cars and what they do to make the industry much more difficult to deal with.
The planned obsolescence. Yeah, we could have a whole episode on like planned obsolescence conspiracies. Yeah.
Yeah, that do well.
Other ways mechanics inadvertently mess up your car. I've seen them do weird things with tires. Boogie. Yeah.
Because you work at a tire shop.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Just like bad repairs. There's the only industry supported repair on a tire is using a patch plug, and it has to be in the center tread of the tire. It can't be on the sidewall or even close to the sidewall. And they also the puncture, whatever the nail or the screw, whatever made the puncture, it can't go in at more than like a 30-degree angle. There's all these stipulations that the tire companies have for if the tire can actually be repaired or not. But the thing is, I've seen mechanics do all types of crazy repairs, and a lot of them do work. But you can't really, I don't hold the mechanics responsible really, because they're doing what the customers want. Because customers, they're not trying to hear all that.
No.
You know, when they have a nail in their tire and you're trying to tell them that it's at a 75-degree angle and you can only fix it if it's at a 60-degree angle, they don't want to hear all that, because to them what they think is you're trying to just sell them a tire.
Yeah, which are really expensive.
Yeah, and so a lot of people, mechanics don't try to help out their customer even if the manufacturers don't recommend the repair. Hey, good time.
So you see them do that a lot at tire shops and kind of sketchy repairs.
Yeah. Yeah, sketchy tire repairs where the tires really should be replaced. And I guess that is, inadvertent because a lot of these mechanics, they don't, they haven't been truly trained on tire repair. So they're just going off of the culture of the shop.
Right.
The culture of the shop supports. Yeah, no, he's the one making noise. I'm sorry. I don't know what he's doing. There is a dog place
The
outside.
mascot today.
We're trying to podcast with you. Have you? What's like some weird tire shenanigans you've ran into?
Well, so we had an alignment rack that I worked at, and I just hate to say it, like, I had a mechanic that worked there came back and said that the rear could not be adjusted on this Volkswagen GTI that I just done suspension on. He's doing alignment for me. And I went back and I was like, here. It's like, here's the camber bolts, and yeah, and I wasn't even that familiar with like really doing alignments, but like that's kind of getting that sort of thing, and that he didn't know that.
Were you guys using a Hunter machine? Was it a Hunter or?
I don't remember what brand. It was a good one. It's the big, the big alignment rack, and I had to go show him that. So I had to wonder how many times that he didn't align the whole car because he wore out the tires. Yeah, every day, and not knowing that where the bolts are to adjust the suspension, which is kind of the same with every car and kind of not. There are some weird suspensions. Like I've seen Dodges come in that have so many different components to their suspension and multiple adjustment spots to do your camber, caster, and toe. And so I can get where it would be a little bit overwhelming on certain cars and everything, but you generally know. And he was like, for sure, this car cannot be adjusted on the rear. And I was like, oh, it definitely can, because the Volkswagen GTI is basically a sports car. It has a lot of adjustment on it.
I think a lot of that is when people first start learning about alignments, they'll identify, like, oh, on this car, you adjust toe by loosening this, and on this car, with each alignment they do, they learn more and more how many different various adjustments that the manufacturers have. And then I think they get to a point where they get confident and they're like, yeah, I'm doing alignments, I do alignments now. And they stop looking for new ways that the car can be adjusted. And if they just don't see one of the easily recognizable ways to adjust a camber or toe angle, they'll just say, hey, you know what, there is no such adjustment in this car. And the reason why I asked about if you guys were using a Hunter is because all of the Hunter alignment machines I've used, the computer will actually tell you, there's a button you can click and it'll show you the adjustments on your car. And a lot of times it'll even tell you what tools you need to loosen and adjust it. Like it'll say what size wrench,
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And
super awesome. Because you had to figure all that stuff out on the machine we had. It was more basic, I guess.
Yeah.
Still a super expensive machine. Like,
right.
I don't remember how much it was, like $20,000 machine. So.
Yeah.
For a little shop, it's kind of hard to get.
Yeah, I mean, if you're spending so much on an alignment machine, you want to make sure all of your customers are leaving with a really great alignment.
Well, we did. We would have to take him back and he would have to readjust them kind of a few times before he got it right, instead of kind of knocking it out in one go.
Yeah.
So that is, I've seen that in other shops too, at alignment shops, where it's like they're not really lining it up all the way, and then on the alignment printout that comes out, a lot of stuff would still be in the red instead of in the green, and they would just let it go like that without any explanation or anything.
That's a lot of this stuff is dictated by the culture of the shop that you're at, and a lot of times the mechanic might even know better, but if the culture of the shop is a certain way, then they'll, you know, it'll rub off on them. But generally with alignments, it's best practice to, if there's ever a angle that you can't adjust, it's best to document it and don't just turn in the paper with out of spec alignments and not say anything. Like, you should be saying what is out of spec, why you can't adjust it, and a lot of times there'll be aftermarket parts you can buy and install that will allow you to adjust it. And so it's actually another sales opportunity and another way to educate the customer, like, hey, you know, we are doing this alignment and we've managed to correct all these different angles. There's another angle we'd like to correct, but your car won't allow us to until we install these parts.
Yeah.
You know, and then you put it on the customer. You know,
Maybe a big control arm or bent tie rod in or strut. I've seen struts come in that were bent, the strut assembly.
Right,
where
or
they
the
hit
steering knuckle will be bent.
The whole tire was, yeah, it messed up everything. And, you know, so all that had to be replaced because it couldn't be aligned properly. Yeah, right, stuff like that. So that's something I've seen a lot with alignments. Not being done properly.
Another big thing, and this is something you learn as you learn alignments, but if you, it's really good to test drive a car before an Inverter, and a lot of people don't do that because they're in a hurry. And I mean, I'm guilty of it as well, because every minute you're driving the car, you're not being paid. Mechanics don't get paid to drive cars.
Yeah, test drive before and after.
Right.
I charge my customers for that, for the full package. Yeah, I was valued in my time. Also charged for the not pre-buy inspection, but for the initial inspection of the car. Just for me to write the estimate, because that all took about 2 to 3 hours.
Right, to do like a full in-depth.
Right, and I didn't even charge as much as that really, truly the value was worth. But that's, you know, I did all my looking up my own parts and looking up labor times, getting parts costs down. You know, my service advisor, when I had a service advisor, did that too, so I factored that into the cost. So the true cost of car for mechanics to actually work on it and do it proper is a little higher than what people are already used to for cars to have it done right. If you can get a good shop that really does take their time and do it all right, it doesn't feel too rushed.
There's so many problems you can avoid by just having the car fully inspected before. And if you're trying to figure out a really weird, complicated issue, it's still good to start with just a general inspection of the car. But what I learned as I did more alignments, if you test drive a car and it seems to drive pretty good, like if it's not pulling a lot, if you put it on the alignment, if you set it up, if it shows that there's any angles that are way out, like instead of going and correcting the angle, like you should recheck it, because you shouldn't have to be making a huge adjustment on a car that, you know, is driving straight, you know. And because a lot of times what will happen is you'll make an error in setting up the machine, and the machine will think that you're out. It'll think that there's a certain angle that's out of spec, but really it's not. And by you trying to put it in spec, you're actually making it out of spec. So that's just one of the things I learned.
Getting the lasers to read right on the line machine and all that.
Yeah.
And it's got all those algorithms and calculations it does to make sure everything's right. It's pretty intense.
The main issue that I have is the heads. You install a head on each wheel, and the head is actually what the computer reads the angles from. If the heads are slipping, then it's going to mess up the angle. And as a side note, if you're paying for an alignment and you're watching the technician do the alignment on your car, if you see him tapping or hitting the part of there's a thing that they'll attach to your rim. If you see them tapping it or hitting it, then what that is, they're trying to trick the machine into making it look like they're aligning your car.
Have you seen that? I haven't seen anyone do
all
that.
the time.
That's new to me. But
all
I
the
get
time.
it.
Yeah, and it's like, because you can play with the alignment head. You can tap it around until the machine reads that it's within spec, and that's way faster than actually doing the adjustment. You know what I mean? But yeah, so that's mostly like it's a Jeep thing, you know, like I know people who have lifted Jeeps, and they'll bring them into an alignment shop, and a lot of the angles won't even be adjustable on the Jeep. You know, like the toe you can adjust for sure, but a lot of them, you know, they won't. You want to lift the Jeep cheaply. You don't want to spend all the extra money on the tools to allow you to adjust it or whatever. So, but the technicians will just say, "Oh, well, I've got the toe green. Now I'm going to smack it around until the camber is green." Because as long as that printout is green, everyone's happy, right?
Wow.
But,
so that's a pretty good one. I
but
didn't know.
that's a malicious thing. That's not like someone inadvertently messing.
Oh
with
yeah,
your car.
inversion. Yeah.
But yeah,
right.
I just thought I'd throw that in there as a side note. Watch the people doing your alignment, because you want to make sure that they're actually lining it up.
Wow. Some other things that mechanics do, not using torque sticks when they torque your lugs. A lot of them don't realize where, and I feel pretty confident hoping they all do a star pattern, but I do see people take them off out without a star pattern. I do a star pattern from the start just to keep it in, you know, being similar
So
on and off.
the idea of the star pattern is to make sure that it's evenly torqued. Yeah.
Right.
I've never heard of people using the star method when they're removing the wheel.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, and I feel like there are some owner's manual or some service manuals for certain repair procedures. They'll even tell you what order to remove bolts, and that's mostly like an engine thing.
Right.
And I think they're doing that because they're trying to relieve the tension in a certain way to avoid cracking or warping something.
Right.
Because basically a lug nut or a bolt, all it's doing is it's clamping some parts together. And on an engine, a lot of the stuff you clamp together, it's not a perfect flat surface. It'll be like a V, you know, so that's where that plays into.
Yeah, I like keeping it consistent, but a torque stick, you can use the impacts, the heavy guns that, you know, mechanics use all the time to put on your lug nuts, but the torque stick keeps it within spec of what the torque is supposed to be for your lug nuts, so that it's proper for your car to last and for you to be able to still take off if you have an emergency on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Average foot-pounds of torque is like 90 to like 100, kind of average for a lug nut, and
But those guns can go.
Yeah, the guns go. The torque on them can go like 300
Right.
foot-pounds of torque quick, or
I have a
average
torque.
on it.
I have like a half-inch air-powered torque, like air gun, and it'll torque it up to like 450 foot-pounds. You know, so if you're just directly driving it, And it's an old-school mechanic thing where mechanics will say like, "Oh, well, my tool is extremely powerful, but I know how to limit its power." You know, and the thing is, like, you really don't. The air pressure in your shop is going to be varying depending on, you know, where the compressor is at, you know, in its cycle. And but yeah, so a torque stick, it's an extension that's made out of spring metal, and most of the time they're color coded. They'll be like spray painted or powder coated different colors, and the colors will denote the max torque that you're able to put through the torque stick. So the reason why that's useful is I can take my gun that goes up to like 400 foot-pounds, and I can put on the yellow torque stick, which limits its output to like 70. And that way, even if I'm negligent and I'm just hammering on the lug nut, it will not tighten it past the 70 foot-pound mark.
Right.
So
Which I honestly very rarely see used.
never, I never see torque sticks.
We had them at automotive school when I went to automotive trade school, and that's when I first learned about them. And
What are some of the problems that you would have from not doing that?
You definitely can't take the lugs off in an emergency.
That's true.
It's horrible. Cross threading is a lot easier to do. Over torquing them, you can't get them back off if they get stuck. I've seen that happen a lot.
And a lot of the damage that happens with that is cumulative. So just because your mechanic one time over torqued your lug nuts, you might not even notice a problem until maybe years later, subsequent mechanics, they keep doing it, and then each time that happens, they're stretching the stud that the lug nut attaches to, and then you're going to get to a point where all of your regular customers, they keep snapping their lug nuts, or like their lug nuts strip or their studs break off, and you don't know why. And
I see that a lot. We
Right.
sell a lot of lugs and studs.
any
at work.
shop that doesn't use those like torque sticks, it just becomes a normal thing at that shop. Like, oh yeah, here's another customer where their lug nut snapped off or
Yeah.
whatever. And I've noticed at shops that, and these are mostly corporate shops, like Firestone is extremely vigilant about ensuring that their employees use torque sticks and are properly torquing with the torque wrench and everything. And when I worked there, I very rarely saw repeat customers with lug nut problems.
Good.
I would still see like one-time random customers off the street. They'd say, "Oh, I just came from Mr. Tire. They couldn't remove my lug nut."
Right.
You know, and I'm like, you already know what happened.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
but it's one of the most preventable. It's one of the most preventable problems on a car is making sure you don't over torque the lug nuts.
Right.
But again, mechanics they're in such a hurry, they think they're saving time by not using those tools. But then you're really not saving time when your loyal repeat customers in for like a quick rotation, and then you're like,
Can't do it, you're
yeah,
fighting it.
exactly.
Which is a real pain. I don't know how many people are watching it have had or listening that have had a lug nut get stuck or cross-threaded or whatever where you cannot get it off on a tire, but it is an absolute pain to get off.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. And especially if you think about you're on the side of the road, you're trying to drive, you're trying to get somewhere, and you get a flat tire and you're stuck. You're absolutely stuck. Like
And
at
you
that
know,
point you have to get
the tools that come with your car, they are barely sufficient when your lug nuts aren't over torqued. Like they barely work as it is. Like the cheap jack and the little lug wrench and stuff.
Right.
And when they're over torqued, they're really not gonna. They're not gonna do anything. Yeah. There was one Mercedes that I worked on. It was actually my manager's car, and we had to do we did something on his wheel bearing, and we got a new hub, a new wheel bearing, and all new wheel bolts. The Mercedes, they use bolts for the wheels.
right.
And,
Yeah, BMW does that too.
Yeah, and so I did the repair, no problems. And basically what ended up happening is maybe a week after that, he was driving on the highway and his wheel actually came off of his car. Like the bolts had gotten loose. Yeah, and the wheel came off. And he pulled over very quickly before the wheel actually came all the way off. Like it was just extremely loose and was bouncing around. And he tightened all the lug nuts back up and had it towed in, and we inspected it. We didn't find any damage. The rim itself, there was a little bit of unusual wear where it mounts on the hub, but it wasn't really that bad. So we tightened everything up, and it kept happening. And what ended up being the root problem is I took out the new wheel bolts, and I compared the profile of the curve where it goes into the rim.
Yeah,
and
it's a strong connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and I compared that to another original wheel bolt that was on another wheel, and the originals were flat cones, and the new ones were they were like bulged. They were acorn style, and it was such a small detail.
Wow.
But that really goes into just anytime you're doing anything involving studs and lug nuts, you want to take your time and pay attention. And that's normally the part of the repair process where you're rushing the fastest, because it's such a repetitive thing you've done, thousands of times before. You're just screwing lug nuts on and tightening them, and you're already thinking about the next car or your lunch or whatever. But
Which is kind of like an industry thing, because everyone does feel rushed when it's coming to trying to beat labor times. All the times that's how we're paid, instead of,
Right.
which in my opinion should be a little more salary, so things like this doesn't happen.
Right.
Or something like that, to keep people from just rushing through jobs to try to make money to get by, because it just causes like a lot of problems, like not taking the time to learn or teach each other about torque sticks and
Yeah.
simple things like that.
And you know, once you get used to using torque sticks and torque wrenches, it really doesn't add much more time. It even if it does, it doesn't really feel like it is. Like, cause that's just how you tighten lug nuts. You know, you just get used to that. But
Right. Yeah, pretty much all the procedures that are kind of not used that should be used are ones that end up saving time in the long run.
yeah.
For sure.
Can you pause that real quick? Alright. I'll be right back. We're gonna pause that also.
Okay.
I'm recording too. So we're back.
Cool. You're back.
Inadvertent ways mechanics mess up your car. So we talked about using the wrong chemicals. We talked about using the wrong tools with 12-point versus 6-point. Lug nut fiascos with over tightening. There's some other stuff we had, yeah, alignment things.
We had a good things written down.
Yeah. Oh, here's a classic one. So you're an old school mechanic, right? Not really, but let's say you're an old school mechanic, and I come to you and I say, hey, I think my alternator is messing up. Can you quickly tell me if my alternator is good?
I love it when they do that.
And then what's your response?
I'm like, well, we have the little testers that run through it and tell them that.
But you know what I'm getting at, right?
Well, I'm not sure.
You just disconnect it.
Oh yeah, and
You
do
disconnect
that. No,
the battery.
I don't do that. But yeah, that is an old school thing, right?
So, generally speaking, so your battery on your car is not used when your car is running. The battery is really only used to initially start the engine. And while the engine's running, it's actually the alternator that's putting out power to keep all of the electrical systems going. And what old school mechanics would do, if they suspected that their alternator was bad, they would have the engine running and they would disconnect the battery. And what that does is at that point, everything electrical in your car is 100% relying on the alternator's power to run. So if you disconnect the battery while the car's running and the car shuts off, that's the old school method of, oh, I've done that, your car shut off, so therefore your alternator's bad. And the reason why that's such a bad thing to do nowadays is because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the computers on these cars, you know, most modern cars will have anywhere from like 5 at the minimum to maybe 20 computers, different modules and stuff. And all of these computers are really sensitive to the amount of voltage that you have. And when you disconnect the battery while your car is running, you could create like a spike in voltage. And so that just disconnecting the battery while your car is running, that could create an electrical problem where there was none before.
I didn't know that. Yeah, it makes complete sense.
And even if it doesn't cause any damage, you're going to set a bunch of codes that are going to basically muddy the waters if you're trying to do a diagnostic later, and every module that your scan tool communicates with has some sort of voltage problem. You don't know if you induced that voltage problem or if it was there before, and you know, but
it was back in the day when I've heard of a single thing. I've just always been, if I test the alternator really quickly, just look it up to a multimeter.
Yeah,
right.
That's good. That's what you want to do. Use the multimeter. You don't want to just be disconnecting batteries. But yeah, that's a well-meaning guy. You know, I've wrenched on cars. You think you have an electrical problem? Well, I know this neat little trick where we can disconnect your battery and that'll tell us if your alternator's good, you know. They mean well, but you know, just doing that is going to cause more problems than it's going to solve.
Which these days, like just jumping off cars is another reason why you shouldn't do that, because of all the computers in it.
Oh yeah.
And that's still something that people do.
I will never give someone a jump with a car. I'll use a jump box.
Right, a jump box is
And
what
if
is appropriate.
Yeah, and if it's like a desperate situation, I would remove my battery from my car and, you know, use it with jump
That's a good idea.
cables. But
Yeah, I don't jump with my car either. And mine's a 2009 Toyota Prius, but regardless, it's still very computer heavy, and I'm terrified to fry anything on it.
yeah,
But I haven't particularly stopped people from letting me jump my car with
right.
their cars.
Yeah.
But I see people, well, this is just like people in general, like jumping their cars wrong, but you see mechanics do it.
Oh, yeah.
They're not turning off the car that's providing the power and that sort of thing. They're just hooking it all up live.
Yeah.
And it's just creates like shocks to the systems. And like Jay's saying, they have so many computers on them, and they're all so sensitive.
Yeah, so
And some people
when
don't make
the engine's running, the alternator it's making adjustments constantly to make sure that the voltage is between, like, it's generally the voltage will be like 14.5 at the highest and like 13.4 at the lowest. That's like a generic range of acceptable voltage. And the newer cars, they have alternators that they can very specifically say what voltage they want, and they'll change that voltage based on the age of the battery, believe it or not. If the car knows that the battery is 5 years old, it'll run a higher voltage to charge it faster. It'll run a higher charging voltage because the older batteries need more voltage. But when you hook up your battery to another battery, you're instantly you're making a huge potential change in the resting voltage of the battery of the system, and so you could induce, like what you said, a shock in the system. You have one battery that maybe they left the lights on for 3 hours and it's at like 12, like maybe 10 volts or whatever, and then your battery is fresh. You connect them two together, you're getting a huge surge of energy from one battery to the other. So
Fry systems.
Ground and sun.
I've seen it quite a bit, actually. See the fry
I've seen people hook up, if you cross the cables, if you hook the positive to the negative, like I've seen that happen, and it's a game changer. Because at that point, like
old
so many
cars, it wasn't a big deal, but these newer ones, it's absolutely horrible.
You're gonna fry so many computer modules and stuff. I know a guy who he had that happen to his truck. It was a new truck, and he brought it to the dealership, and they were fixing it under warranty. Like, he didn't tell them that the problem was due to him mixing the cables. He just acted stupid, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with my truck. Please fix it." And they had the truck at the dealership for like 10 months. They kept ordering different computers, and they would install them, and there would still be issues.
Wow. Yeah, tell your mechanics what happens.
That is one thing. Customers need to be honest about the situation. Yeah, a lot of people, and I think it's a psychological thing. If something bad has happened to you, or like if something bad happened to something that you own, there's like a mental aspect of you want to minimize it, because you don't want to acknowledge, like, oh yeah, this is a catastrophic, bad, terrible thing that happened. You want to just be like, oh no, it's just this little noise, and that's like a way of psychologically insulating yourself. Maybe if I just say, oh, the problem is just this little noise, then by minimizing your problem, you're also minimizing the solution. Like, it's kind of like you're trying to trick your mind into willing into existence an outcome where you only have to spend $20 to fix it. Like,
and I've actually seen it a lot.
Right.
Like, customers not tell the truth, and eventually, like, you kind of figure out and get to the bottom of what happened. Like, at that point, how many hours are wasted of time on both of your parts trying to figure out what's going on for the customer, for you.
Right.
But that brings me to something else that mechanics do that is inadvertent. You definitely have a lot of old school mechanics who have a base knowledge of the working system of a car, but it's based on carburation and older cars and not computers. So misdiagnosing is a big problem. Not taking the time to diagnose properly, which is something that should definitely be included in the overall cost of whatever repair it is you're doing for a car. There is no way to gauge that. There's no labor hours for that. There's nothing that says it's going to take this long to diagnose a no-start problem. There's nothing like that out there. So it has to be an honesty thing between the mechanic and the customer.
Yeah.
And a customer understanding. I had a lot of customers that were very understanding about the time it takes to work on a car and how hard it is, and this is what it's going to take to do it. And I will charge you the bare minimum, but I've got to charge you the actual time I spend on it. And mechanics are, but that being one of the things I've seen a lot is misdiagnosis a lot, especially these newer cars.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't trained up on it.
One huge thing too, so mechanics want to find problems, and they want to fix problems. It's not fun if you find a bunch of problems and then the customer never approves the repair. It's kind of demoralizing. But the industry average, at least for like chain shops, is around 20%. So what that means is, of all of the problems that are documented by the mechanic and recommended to the customers only buy 20% of the recommended, yeah. And that's some industry figure. I'm sure it varies by shop to shop, but
I
that's
could
the
definitely
average.
see it. For my customers, it was kind of the opposite, but that was like a specific clientele. But for the auto industry, yeah, because there's so much distrust in the industry,
right?
And they want to do the bare minimum or whatever.
And a lot of people they know their car has problems, multiple problems, and they're just doing triage. Yeah, sure, my check engine light's on, but that's not a problem until my car needs the inspection, which isn't for another 8 months.
Right.
So instead I'd rather fix my air conditioning or whatever.
Right.
But so I mention that because it's human nature when you're diagnosing something. Once you identify a problem, you think you're like, oh, here's the problem, and if it's a problem where it's conceivably could conceivably cause the problem that the customer has described, then you want that to be the fix. So a big mistake that mechanics.
You're right.
Yeah. So the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of times, especially on older cars, there might be multiple contributing factors to why the customer is experiencing an issue with their car. And just because you find one problem, it doesn't mean that that's the only problem, and it doesn't even mean that it's related to what the customer is experiencing. So you have to be careful with how you present problems that you found to customers, because you don't want to give them the impression that, oh yeah, once I buy the repair for this, it's going to fix everything else. And a lot of times customers, if they don't effectively communicate everything, they might have it in there. They may have verbally told you about a noise, but there's also maybe something else going on that they didn't bother to tell you about because they're assuming it's the same thing. I've heard this so many times, oh, I thought that this repair would fix that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, hey, you never even told me that you were experiencing this other issue.
Like comes like a pre-repair inspection test drive that helps out. That's not done very often.
Yeah.
In
But
school for automotive, my teacher told me
He might
about
jump.
kind of being ambiguous.
He might jump, just so you know.
Oh, okay. You might knock me over too.
Yeah. A little ambiguous about your confidence on it being a fix.
Yeah.
And before I went to school, I was one of those mechanics who's like, this is it. I was right a lot, but it was still those times where you're not, and you have to come back to the customer and be like, well, you don't want to do that.
Right. And a lot of times you will find the problem, and it will be the only problem, and you'll fix it, and everyone will move on to the next thing. But it's just occasionally. What I would always present it to people as, I would say, for example, if you're having a problem with your air conditioning not working, and I pull out your cabin air filter and it's completely clogged, and I do a quick inspection of everything else in the AC and I don't see any problems. What I'll tell the customer is, look, your air conditioning relies on like an entire system of parts working together. And today, looking at your car, we found one of those parts with an issue. And in order to evaluate the whole entire system, we need to fix known problems. I can't evaluate other parts of your car while there's this glaring, obvious problem. You know, so I would just present it like that. You know, like if your car is running rough and I find that one of your ignition coils has a crack in it, you know, what I say is, hey, your ignition coil is cracked. You have 4 of them, one of them is cracked. This could contribute to the problem that you're experiencing, but we can't even further evaluate your car until we fix this known issue. And that way there's no promise made that it's going to be perfect, you know.
So kind of to summarize, like if your tech is coming to you and saying, this is it right here, and they're very, very confident, and they're really not giving you much information about it, that's kind of not good. You need a second opinion. I recommend second opinions, third opinions a lot in the car industry. Because
there's a lot of things that
a lot of them are confident and they're wrong a lot.
Yeah, even just asking coworkers, you know, and there's a bit of an ego. Mechanics have this ego thing. Not all mechanics, but a lot of them do, where they won't want to seek help from coworkers because to them that's like an admission of. And again, that just goes back to shop culture. You know, some shops are very collaborative.
Right.
And it just depends on the energy there.
And some are very competitive.
Right.
I worked at a Toyota dealership and it was very competitive between the mechanics. You wouldn't think it would be like that at Toyota, but I was surprised too. And they did not work together. They did not collab.
A lot of people, they have this mistaken thought where if they'll think, oh, if my service manager sees that I'm always asking other people for help, then he'll think I don't know anything and he'll not give me like good work. And maybe some service managers think like that, but honestly, probably most service managers will have gained enough experience to know that there's no way that one person can perfectly diagnose something every time. And so for me personally, I would rather give jobs to a mechanic who knows when he needs help, because that's better than giving it to someone who is overconfident and not going to ask for, you know, advice or anything like that.
By far, something I've seen a lot is ones that ask for help, or they're way better mechanics overall. A lot more problems are avoided.
Right. Well, if you think about it, they're mechanics like that. They learn more over time because they're open to new information.
Yeah. I mean, I would even compare spark plugs and be like, I need to make sure this is exactly what I mean, I just get like crazy about asking questions. I ask so many questions.
Yeah.
But I was in a shop when I did work in a shop, because I worked for myself for so long, but when I was in the shop environment, our shop was very collaborative. We helped everyone. It was all one big project to us, whatever everyone cars had. And that was definitely an advantage. Like, I highly recommend to people to use a small shop and get a relationship with them where you can trust that they're getting to know you and they're really taking it seriously to work on your car, and they're very passionate about it, very reliant on repeat customers, like, you know, your smaller shops are.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know you worked at a big shop and yours had a good culture like that, but you know, a lot like that. And even some small shops are not like that, but you want to get to know them. And you know how you go to a doctor and you'll have a doctor sick for a health doctor, right? And I've had doctors be like, I need to research this a little further and kind of find out more about what's going on. They don't think they know everything, and they don't act like they do. It's good to kind of have that relationship with your mechanic too, who's willing to say, I need to research this, because not a single mechanic knows everything there is to know. Is absolutely impossible. No one will ever. I mean, you could put 5 mechanics in a room and they don't know everything.
Yeah.
They'll never be able to fully. Automotive is just an extremely complicated, complex world, and to know all the stuff, and it's absolutely insane. It's not like a doctor who is just a brain surgeon or just a heart doctor, you know, because that's all one manufacturer, you know what I'm saying?
And they also, you know, they get the benefit of like 10 years of school for that one thing.
Right.
You know,
Where we're like constantly winging it.
Yeah, mechanics are expected to not only know a lot about what is already on the market, but they're expected to quickly adapt and learn the new technologies as they get released by the manufacturers.
Which is at this point is happening extremely fast. For years it wasn't so fast, but now it's just.
You think it's accelerated?
I think it's accelerated dramatically in the past 20 years, and now we're seeing another shift. Like from the shift from carburation to fuel injection, that threw a lot of
Right.
mechanics off, and that was like the big change.
Right. I guess you're right.
One big change.
Because for a while, I think car technology was kind of stagnant. Like it progressed very slowly. But now it's just like every 5 years there's some new driver assist that didn't exist before, and some new form of fuel injection.
Yeah, GDI versus regular fuel injection. That you're seeing that a lot on cars. We need to do an episode talking just about GDI because
Yeah.
a lot of people don't know what that is.
Right.
And even mechanics inadvertently do not know about GDIs because that's kind of a new engine thing. You saw it in
Yeah.
diesels for years, but that's a whole different setup
you
of an
can- you
engine.
can,
On a gas engine, it's very detrimental
direct
to the way it
injection.
runs. Yeah.
You can actually get blood poisoning from a direct injection system if you disassemble it improperly.
Wow.
Because the way they work is there'll be a low pressure fuel pump in the tank, just like a normal fuel pump, electric fuel pump, and all it's doing is providing fuel to another fuel pump that's actually ran by the engine. Most of the time, these high pressure fuel pumps is what they're called. They'll be driven by the camshaft, and they'll take in fuel that's already pressurized, and they'll bump it up to like 2,000 psi.
Yeah, really high PSI.
Yeah, and the problem with that is, so you have these lines that contain 2,000 psi